a lot or a little, depending on how you want to look at it. Thank you for speaking with me, and I think this is a good view or perspective into the situation, because everybody gets caught up in a lot of advanced technology and secret operations and cabal and Illuminati secret groups. Basically, a lot of negative stuff. And even though looking at timeline shifts or scalar weaponry, things like that, has a negative kind of like an angle to it, it's, in my opinion, primarily positive, because we're looking at what we can do with it and what it means to us, and as well looking at things in the way of a more organic, if you will, perspective of what it means from an energetic or spiritual. It basically just means psychological. It's just the Western view of psychology, more or less literally just with the Eastern view combined. We don't really have to go too far outside of literal academic Eastern thinking in order to get right into what is considered in the West spirituality and in some cases nonsense, but in that sense comes the dichotomy, the battle, the difference and the divide between the East and the West, and literally the two hemispherical ways of describing mentalism with intuition or logic and analysis. But the two are always intricately combined. There's really no difference in that sense, and I mean, it's the perspective that we hold, looking at like an orb, if you will, from different angles, that creates that right and left divide, which is actually the same reality, same thing. But in that kind of introduction to what I hope to begin to talk about, that's where we have like the Western view, where a lot of it is focused so intently on what seems to be physical and basically contrasting or like competitive or combative perspectives of what's happening. It's always a battle. It's always us versus them, the rich versus the has-beens or never were, or the commoners. There's always a sense of divide there. And so in taking a step back from this dichotomy, this parallel, and coming just to what it means in our lives as we grow and develop over time, as we come to know what is simply basically cosmic psychology, what we all have to do with directly, and the choices that we make every day, that's what's going to get us into a new paradigm, to use a completely corrupted and overly laden word, but that's what's going to get changed. Everything else is kind of this parroting of a kind of narrative sitcom for reality, which, in my opinion, has poisoned the natural well of knowledge and creativity that all you have to do to access is look within and utilize your own natural abilities to create using your mind. With that said, in my perspective, there has been previous changes that seem to begin to solidify in the past 2 years, and I began speaking publicly with my face. I've always been doing it in some way or another, but I put my face behind it basically in February of 2016 or so, and I noticed, I've written about this and I've said this before to at least one other person, that I noticed a crazy deal of change happening then. That was part of why I began to speak directly. Later that year, it kind of, for me, evened out and not much was happening into November, December. A lot of people said they noticed a lot of stuff happening in December. For me, that was kind of like a null point, but in that sense, maybe that's a time of great change, and that's just how I experienced that, which is everybody's different, and it's just like a seesaw how we all work. There's always going to be somebody feeling something different or opposite to what somebody else feels. That's how it kind of works. That's kind of what keeps the perpetual motion machine of our minds going. If we were all 100% like a magnet, polarized one way then the other way at the same time, there would be no variance. We wouldn't know we were polarized one way or the other, because there would be no difference between us. So always there's this type of trend of variation, and then you have this wave of what the masses basically feel throughout that, and through that we get these ages and epochs of highs and lows and different tendencies and habits in what we experience as a culture, or like a mass culture. But after that, like the beginning of 2017, it basically got real weird, and a lot of people, their memories were changing, my memories were changing. I was getting basically the previous run-up from 7 years of what I experienced. It began to alter, and this is what we were told was going to happen, that around this time, the same changes that were happening in 2003, 1999, 2012, 13, apparently back into the 80s, 86, 89, there were these cycles of change that built up, and it resulted in everybody who was seemingly, aware of what was happening, of these energies, of these refined senses, waking up and going, why is everything different? What happened? Something happened, we can't see what happened, but it's as if somebody switched everything around and, at night, and the conscious mind has no way of looking back and as if there's a recording and seeing every single day and noticing what's different, but it's clearly obvious that if you were to sense, through a beyond the physical capacity for perceiving, which is what the spirit is all about, it's simply the brain and body, the physical, and then beyond that is the spiritual senses. It is as if somebody changed enough finite little details to result in a literally modulated different reality based upon some kind of ideals that no one can quite put their finger on, but is apparent to just about everyone who seems to look, which is the strangest thing, of course. What we were told about these, we were briefed on these, and they're apparently a part of an ongoing operation to bring about a resolution to long-term disruptions in the temporal field, which took place beginning in what we call Egypt or Egypt, Atlantis, what people refer to as Atlantis, and in between those two, Lemuria apparently, and a type of Pangea, global, or if you want to use the term global, you could also use the term flat pancake realm, whatever you want to call it, or inverted extra-dimensional toroid, if you want to be more specific, and that there was some type of civilization that was split up, and this tends to be explained as the result of advanced technology and a spiritual incursion or temporal incursion by what are called invader races. So everything we see now seems to be a result of temporal ripples moving through what we can call or refer to as a fabric of time or a time space, and those who are aware enough to a certain degree, I don't really want to get into the differences of who's aware and who's not, but those who have the ability to sense, which relates to DNA and genetics and things like that, they know these changes are happening. The idea is that it's for a resolution of problems that have been taking place for the entirety of our civilization, to the point where it kind of wrapped up this entire civilization in a paradox, or which is basically just saying an unequal or an imbalanced equation which must balance itself out before the entirety of what's happening can resolve itself. Hope I didn't ramble too much there. Ooh, you're cutting out. What was that? You cut out entirely. These are good questions, they're good concepts. I can tell you based upon experiences, and the funny thing is anybody who has an experience outside of this plane is telling you the truth. Because you can experience anything outside of this plane, that's the whole point. Maybe it'll get a little weird if they say, and then something happened here, like they were president last week and everything got switched around and now they're not, or something like that is questionable. But if somebody says they have another experience in a parallel or basically a higher dimensional realm, well, anything can happen there because it's based upon mind. That's what's outside of the universe, or at least the physical plane. Your way of asking questions, you set up what you do know based upon kind of having a pseudo opening for what you don't know, and that you can be profiled that way. But the idea is that your view, or your beginning view, is pretty much what you would want to have in order to find the truth. People are sold whatever is required to keep them doing just what they're told. So it gets pretty weird, but for the most part, the less intelligent people are, the more simple the outcome and the premise for the lie is and has to be. Which means it's the old saying, I think adage, if what is it? I think reality is stranger than fiction. And it's to the degree where if people who were lied to and given the worst, absolute, horrifying, false version of reality, the true reality would always overwhelm them more. And the main idea is that the physical plane or membrane, or whatever you want to visualize that as, outside of that, meaning outside of this, the boundaries of this temporal spatial dimension, is mind. It's governed by mind. Inside you and outside the physical, there's just mind. And so, in other words, it's governed by mind, meaning the mind of the observer who is experiencing whatever they're experiencing that is not anchored by the physical laws, basically. You can't experience unless your mind is prepared for it and is seeking that experience, meaning it's as if you're kind of programming that into reality and then having that experience. There's a subconscious conscious interplay, which is simply not tethered to a physical body and the physical realm that the physical body is tethered to, meaning you can cycle times of experience in an imaginative way. And the idea is that everything, it's always, to get to the truth, it's backwards. What is given to the public is 180 degrees from the truth. And this is basically a satanic inversion principle. And it's because if they buy that, if they buy the 100% inversion, then everything in them will want to fight having to turn 100% or 150 degrees or 80 degrees, around and look behind them, because then it's an emotional bias, and that emotional bias sets them up as a mind entrainment protocol or barrier to the point where they're not going to accept the truth, even if it slaps them in the face. Or it actually works to enable a very easy ability to traumatize a person, because now all you have to do is show them that their worldview is basically a farce. And we've seen this time and time again. If somebody is in a kind of traumatic experience, even violence or wartime or something, the brain shuts off very rapidly to if you don't need, I don't mean to be violent, but guns and say somebody getting shot brutally and killed will traumatize a person who hasn't seen that. You don't need that. If somebody literally saw a being who was not human and is not possible to fit into their worldview, they will literally 100% black that out, walk the other direction, and pretend it never happened. And from there on in their memory, it'll be recorded as if it never happened. That's how it works. The brain will record it in the subconscious, but the conscious mind won't be able to access those memories. It's very easy. It's easier to have a world leader come out and flash somebody and be like, yeah, we own you, we do whatever we want, it's all a game to us, than it is to say through gore and violence, like a bus flipping over and something like that. They're more likely to remember that than they are to face the fact that everything that they believed in this situation is a lie based upon false authority and the people that they literally worship completely treating them like slaves. It's because there's an emotional bias, and the persona then is set up to support that like a pinnacle, and it fractures when that central point is brought out. So the point of that is that if you want the truth, just take what they're telling you and flip it 180 degrees, and that's the truth. And they do that as a message for those who are willing to face the darkness and realize that there's something happening here that's not basically what's being presented at face value. But the point is, because what's happening And what happened with these underground situations and the advanced technology and these breakaway civilizations and what's actually out there is so far from what could be explained in this situation that it would automatically make a person's mind explode in mainstream reality. It would cause uncontrollable outbursts and psychotic episodes, bipolar disorder, and basically depression, all the psychotic tendencies, schizophrenia, that the only way to maintain this civilization from that point on, which from their point of view is forever because they've always known these things, these controlling factions and things like that, and they even say they're from another civilization. And so that from that point on, the continuity of the civilization depends on how well you can lie and how well you can put up a front and make people think their voting counts, basically, and that the corporations care about them and that their money actually means something. And it's the whole thing from then on is a facade. It's an illusion. It's a charades. And the problem is where these certain individuals brought into that situation got completely too greedy and completely too personal about their illusory projected power, and now they don't want to give it up, even when it's time to come to that point where everything can change. And so the point with that is that you really don't want to get to the point where there's a nexus of all things. Your percent to light, there's no longer an I and a them or anything like that. And it's literally just one complete godhead of experience. But that means there's no longer any us. There's none of this is happening. We don't have TVs. You don't have advanced technology because everything is advanced technology. It's all through mind. You can make everything happen with your mind. Well, at that point, nothing's happening because everything's happening. So there's no you in there to experience that. So the point is, what there is it looks like an hourglass where there's a nexus in the center. And part of this is that you could see in the lie of society, there are terms and conditions and expectations that go on for so long. But where the road of time is going is that it leads to a point where the lie can't be put up with anymore. It has to be unveiled. So what happens is there's a point, say 2 weeks, where there's no more. There's literally no more space. If you were to get in a craft and go 2 weeks from now, you'd hit into a black void because there's nothing there. And so what they'll do is they'll literally have computer systems and teams of individuals use programming and basically mind magic to calculate what can be done next in society, in history, through false flags, where nobody gets hurt at all. There's not even an event. It's 100% on TV, but so many people buy into it and believe in it. It has the desired effect on the collective mind. Certain events. I'm not saying the false flags that people talk about are those, but imagine the ones that nobody talks about, that nobody knows, are those. And so, but those exist. There's evidence of things like that forever. I'm also saying it's not just to get a political agenda, it's to change the mind of humanity. And the point is, they can program events in, and now that cone, that nexus, that point where everything was going to have to be unveiled, it goes 2 weeks down or 2 years down or whatever the limit is going to be. And so they're scooping as they go through hyperspace, inventing this dimension, inventing this time as they go, using the masses basically, and programming modalities, huge webs of networks of information and individuals that know just how to interplay on the psychology of people, the desires, needs, wants, and get them to buy and to fight and to support and rabble and do all the crazy stuff that people do, which is what we know as the substance of this society, which is basically the substance of this dimension. So that's part of that idea behind that if it ever gets to a point where the show is no longer basically accepted, then two things are going to happen, and this is what I'm going right down the list and I don't even look at it, but that's how it's how it's explained. It's the, awaken or not, or don't exist situation. That two things. So basically we run out of fuel and people no longer buy the charades, but in the same sense, they don't want the truth. They don't care about anything. They basically begin to fizzle out. And at that point, there's no fight left in the people. The shows, basically, it's all media based. It's competition and basically like degradation based media and debauchery and all this stuff. All of that basically flat out has no effect, and people begin to shut down and stuff like that. Basically, if that happens, the continuation will be dependent on the unveiling. But if people can't handle that because it causes that previously described psychosis, then that would basically be the world. We literally watch the world turn up. I mean, I don't know how to describe it. Think of any of these movies or any of these terms. The world turns inside out and goes belly up, and we're all, Anyway, but that's called Armageddon. That's when there's a war of the worlds and people can't handle the truth. Everything begins to leak out. In previous timelines, it was explained that a satanic super soldier takeover was used to keep things going in that sense, because people didn't want to accept what was happening, but didn't want to do the work to basically contact from empathetically and care about one another and exist in this type of spiritual manner. Because if we're not going to do that, we turn to robots. In the same sense, there's a very powerful system that is capable of telling everyone massively or over the entire civilization very rapidly with instantaneous feedback what to do in order to get them to take themselves out, so that it can rule. So that's partially another aspect of this, why you have people who are managing this civilization in teams of behind-the-scenes programmers, because there are invisible threats, and majority of the threats are actually invisible, but that's case in point. You have the visible threats, which are illusions to keep people from realizing that there are invisible threats. But the whole point behind that in this situation is that the other option is the apocalypse, which is where people have come to the awareness of what is without having to be told, without the sky breaking open, without beings landing, without a crazy disaster, whatever it is, and that people awaken to the truth without having to be told. And in that sense, it is in a way their spiritual right, their blood right, their birthright, and they're basically it's like a soft Armageddon, where it's an awakening, a mass awakening, but people don't turn to violence, they don't turn to wars, and the groups that control people are paid and basically designed, contracted to control people through war and violence. And so there will be temptations and attempts, but if the awareness increases enough, if there's enough self-awareness to basically energetically fund what would be for the first time in how many thousand years, 11,000 or 100,000 years or something, a self-aware collective mind of this humanity, then at that point, that it's literally a kind of physical or higher dimensional physical or spiritual physics, where that mind bears the weight of the stress of actually knowing the truth. And if we don't have that self-awareness, when we interact in crowds, we act like animals. Right now, the mass of people don't have that self-awareness. The majority of them are not self-aware, to the point where the one or two self-aware people in that crowd going, no, don't do that. What? Why would you do that? It's not going to offset the imbalance of 1,000 people going ape shit, basically. And so, but the point is, the people running everything in the true sense are trying to basically tickle the neurons, the amygdala, the pineal, the pituitary, the brainstem, the cortex, the cerebellum, cerebrum. They're trying to get the system to activate in an all or nothing expansion of mind and memory beyond the lower dimensional or the lower emotional energetic desires and fears, because that is required in order for this to work. And as well, the fears and the desires must be overcome, which means it can't be done for you. I can't overcome your desires and fears for you, and no one can do it for me. Someone somewhere deep inside this vessel and this concept of who I am must take self-responsibility and rise to the front. And this ties back into the view of the universe, whereas everything that happens here is seen through the body as the surface view of what is actually in existence. We see the skin and the color here, but we don't see the bones, the tissues, the vessels, the blood, the minerals, the all the different organelle systems, all the way down to elements that are there. We see the surface, but that view that sees the surface is not actually us, and this surface view is not actually us. It's actually the whole thing, which is us. So that view is the conscious mind, and the conscious mind is what is plugged in most directly to the biological perception. The perceptions you feel in this moment are just a membrane, a page of the actual book of who you actually are. Getting beyond that surface view, going deeper or within, all these metaphors, because it's an abstraction. There is no direction that points to where the center of you is. It's literally a general, direction, a general orbulous idea. and then it is a concept of spaces between spaces. So it's a spiral, but it means it's a collection of spaces and directions rather than one object with one space or one thing, because it's not that. If you drew it as lines, they would be intersecting lines. If you drew it as an egg-shaped thing, it would be the big egg-shaped thing made with lines with spaces in between where it's not. So it's all intersecting and mixed throughout, kind of like an atom. And in that sense, it's primarily empty space, meaning it's not an object or a thing that's there. It's not a single substance, excuse me. It's a collection. It's an over harmony. It's as if you have a symphony and you have each individual instrument. Well, if you have three or more notes played together at an offset of notes or pitches, you end up with an over harmony, or what's called a harmony. And if you change that a lot, you get a melody. And so each one of those separately, it doesn't add up to that. But when you put them together, you get something that's beyond either of them. That's what the person, the mind, the spirit actually is. It's neither of the parts, but a collection that is only present when everything is in perfect unity. Finding that takes more than just one portion of the brain or focusing on one thing at a time, and it's actually nothing actually happens. When you find that, you just come to a certain awareness, an aha, and to do that you have to tap into an inherent empathy where you're okay with whatever is happening in the moment and not freaking F out and doing whatever is being programmed through this biological computer system. So going beyond the system, the computer system, the membrane, the physical sense, the desires, all of that, the fear, the impulses, the linear processing, that is the essence of coming into contact with the spirit. And when you actually disconnect from that, this is what I was saying before, it's not that you go into a void and now there's no mind and it's empty and you got to go back and build stuff and get it there. It's actually filled with stuff. It's filled with pure experience, with pure feeling. As soon as you get outside of the boundaries of this universe, which is not what everyone thinks, it's not like out there or anything like that, it's in your mind or in between every space. As soon as you get outside of it, it's not, now for the next trillion years, we develop how to make a body again so we can get back live. It's how do you cut down the mass of billions of experiences that want to happen all in one instantaneous moment that you're outside, so that you can remember that you were once a human and you were once in a physical plane and you once had a conscious mind with these memories. It's about retaining who you are because there's so much else out there. It's actually backwards. But that kind of gives a little bit of a rundown on what's going on, that it's a resolution for our species. And a lot of this has been talked about. I'll try and wrap that up, as having to take place within a time, a limit of some, I think it was about 6,000 years that we have, and it might be 3,000 now because of 3,000 having already been in operation, if you will. But that basically, the advanced technology launched us forward, and a portion of us forward to such a degree that they're basically another civilization now. They're not classified as human intelligences. One of their people of these secret groups could match a team of people thinking, a crowd, I can't think of the word right now, not crowdfunding, but crowdsourcing worth of imaginative processing and informational power, where you have these enzymes and chemicals that basically you can heal a gunshot wound in a few seconds. You can maximize your intelligence. You can expand your life, longevity and things like that. And so there's a difference now, but the idea is that we all have to catch up to the same general civilization. We don't have to be the same exact, because then it's like a ball that kind of rolls over itself when there's a slingshotting of the highs and the lows. But right now, the highs and the lows that are normally interfacing are so drastically different that they can no longer actually even communicate and understand one another. So we're actually in two different civilization worths of highs and lows on this spectrum, and it's because of this incursion into the timelines and the introduction of advanced technology and genetic modification, which altered the species to the point where it's literally like two different species now. And as well, there's evidence that the races themselves are more than one kind of species to begin with. And what we're told is races and things like that are actually different, what you could call different species. But I don't really use the explanations of intergalactic and cosmic and basically beyond physical plane and higher dimensional planes. I don't really use those definitions. That's the idea. So the idea is that it's happening very, very quickly, at least now, and that basically the people who are at a lower level of awareness will begin to vibrate, and if you're at a higher sense, the vibrations are finer. They're like if ants are on a paint spinner, stir or something, and if you're at a lower vibration, the vibrations are denser, and it's as if those people will tend to get thrown off of this reality or kind of get too unstable in order to remain again in communication with the rest of civilization. That's the kind of interplay that we're seeing now, and that's what we want to. You can't really limit it because it has to happen regardless, but we want to protect ourselves, and it's basically by not interacting and interfering with that and offering help where it is requested and desired. Putting help or the truth in where it's not is pretty much like an act of war, which is what we're going to begin to experience and discuss, because that's what happened to our species that caused wars for thousands of years. Sorry again. So yeah, the bandwidth is pretty much changing. There is a natural resonance of where we should be at, and this is always what always comes up is the origins of humanity, how we were in previous times, and how ancient civilizations interacted with these technologies and these truths. They had technology in ancient times in the previous civilizations in Rome that rivals the supercomputer systems of today. They had stuff in the like the Aztec and the some of the other names I can't really pronounce on the spot, the pyramids and the stone carvings, and these technologies were gateways. They were active gateways that could open up doorways where an adept could navigate through the gateway and literally turn their body and their mind into an energy beam that would go into another parallel. That's what nothing I talk about is just speculation. So I have seen in operations the acquisition, which is more or less effed up because basically a bunch of white guys in army boots with M16s or the little machine guns come and commandeer basically these old ancient sites. But it is what it is, and that's what happened. I'm not really saying one way or another what I support, but I was there and I saw it. Acquisitioning, taking these ancient sites and activating them and figuring out how to activate them. And a lot of times they'll tell us, but again, I can't tell everything, but they'll say, well, they were going to plan an invasion across the whole world because sure, you might not like us or not everybody likes us, but guess what? That guy was going to freaking take over the world. He's a lunatic, like whoever, some of these other nations. And often, a lot of time, it's more or less accurate that we don't know how quickly somebody was literally going to pull the trigger because they were done with the civilization and they have access to this technology, and that's all it takes if you have access to that. But I can't really go too far into that, but there's technology to see what's coming. There's technology to sense out in the air. It's really big and really strange, kind of like a sitcom of science fiction that actually occurs with what we call government. There's actually no such thing as government because it's all these different groups that are in control that all, like put on the mask of government at various times in their operations. And there's, at the end of it, everybody's got a government mask. When they're in the camera's light, they put on, it says government, and they walk through the way. And all these different groups do that. As soon as the show is up, everybody drops their mask, and everybody who thinks there's some government or something, there's going to see a bunch of secret groups and have no one to answer for. It's a farce. It's going to disappear. It has nothing to do with anything. At least it's a pacifier for the people right now, though. But the idea is that there were different times where the bandwidth, the spiritual resonance, was at a different caliber, and there's evidence of different civilizations working with these spiritual energies, these truths, in ways that right now just looks like science and it challenges our comprehension. There was spacecraft from ancient enough. Part of the contract with this civilization being managed is that there's always enough evidence left behind for someone who really wanted to know to find out what was going on. There's always enough evidence left behind. You cannot forcefully fully remove everything at any point because that's not the goal anyway. They're not trying to take over. If they wanted to, we'd all be in chicken cages, and I'd be squawking at you across the aisle if we wanted to be taken over. It's because everyone is fighting and it's leaking out into the atmosphere of hyperspace and causing disruptions and distortions all across basically time space. But the idea with that is that changes occur, but there were always groups of the civilization, because of basically the light transference capacity of their DNA, that their blood and their consciousness, their mind, is immune to basically being hijacked by what are known as interdimensional entities, which are simply like mind parasites, like waking sentient nightmares that just flutter around in hyperspace and attach to whoever is going to allow that to go on in their energetic sphere. They're just simply their mind. Meaning dirty thoughts of a certain way that amount to dirty words, that amount to dirty actions, to a serial killer. Okay, those are basically hyperspatial parasites that infest a human system and drive them to do things that no one would want to do if it was just them in their sphere and their beingness. And these things are everywhere, which is just like saying there's bacteria. If your immune system shuts off and you lay on the ground, well, eventually everything's going to start eating you. That's how it works. Everything will. Right now, the air is trying to eat you. There's bacteria everywhere that's trying to get in and devour you. And your immune system has this interplay, this handshake with this reality where energy is being fed in and everything's kept at bay and it's all good. The point is, a lot of what has gone on has been to reduce the natural immunity of people, the natural strength to overcome these mind parasites. And this has infected the society to the point where debauchery and degradation on every level of spirituality, and all that means is awareness and compassion, self-awareness. You know what you're doing, why these things are being done to you, why you're letting it happen, why, not you personally, but why certain people do these things and allow these desires, all this sick stuff. And awareness of knowing that a person is aware and doing that, and compassion, being able to feel what the person feels and what the other person feels and why that's not how they were born, that is not how their energy is supposed to be. It is a modulation, a manipulation of the natural blueprint of the human. Being able to understand those things means we're here, we're not crazy, and we're healthy. That's it. That's all it means. Not some mystical, whatever. But the idea is that because these things are commonplace, everyone in the society is sick. Everyone has an energetic parasite, more or less, feeding on them, and it's part of an old plan, a contract to basically make that work for as long as they wanted, and it bit them in the ass. But this whole situation is about the resolution, because the point is the immune, the sovereign beings, because of the way time and DNA works, all you have is time-like curves, bubbles of time that exist before and after one another. They're switched kind of like a figure eight, like that, a triple figure eight. The beings make cause, they keep that balance, that refined sense of self, which would get disrupted if you add a bunch of, it's like a color, if you add a bunch of random colors to it, or a specific harmony where you add a bunch of noise and other instruments and banging trombones and things like that. The vibration that wins out, that is so refined and balanced that you knock it one way and it balances itself to come back the other way instead of falling over like a drunk or something like that, the one that is refined to the end of time, those are the ones that start the civilization. The far, far future is the ancient past and ancient history. The ones who are pure to make it there are the ones who are pure enough to make it in the beginning and make the whole thing appear. It's, the future is a nexus point that reaches to the past. That's actually the nexus point. And once we get balanced enough, we go to the other side. But the idea is those people have an immunity. And so a lot of the experiments had to do with testing that immunity and attempting to replicate it, interdimensional military force, or figuring out how to infiltrate and basically convert people into mind slaves. But the idea is that immunity is always there, and it has to do with the original blueprint of humanity, which basically just comes down to the notion of self-awareness and compassion, and that those essences are a refined version, a very, very fine, subtle wavelength of information and variance that is not very high or low or contrasting or desire-based. It's the most basically pinnacle or supreme sense of awareness, which doesn't require contrast in order to exist, and that can't be destroyed. It can't be destroyed, and it can't be faked or hybridized or hijacked. Although a lot is happening to basically get people to go into a delayed state, which is called, or an atom going into like there's a state with the electrons can be super activated, or they can be shut down into a dormant state. I can't think of the word right now, and that's basically what's happening with those people. You can't really destroy spirit, but you can get it to basically dim down. And when people are dimmed down, then it's a lot easier to control people and groups. The idea with certain people, you said, that seem to be aware of these issues, these things, that's basically residual awareness. We find that whenever operations are carried out and things are changed, including if something happened and a family's eating a meal and guys in suits kick the door down, grab the parents, jab them in the neck with a trank chemical that makes them completely black out the last hour of time, and then the parents first because they're strong, and then all the kids that are like screaming and crying get a jab too. All the tears are wiped off. Certain information that has to be taken, or whatever it is that has to be done, is taken. They lock up the doors or get out and lock up the doors, and they're gone, and no one ever knows they were there because the family has basically amnesia from the chemical. The idea there's always some in the population that would require a lethal dose in order to completely black out their memory, that they have some ability to gain a residual awareness beyond all of the amounts of manipulation, trauma, chemical sedation, whatever it is. So the idea is that there's the holographic ability for the brain to store memory in a type of crystalline folding of information that can be accessed at any point in the brain, but is shared at no single point. And it's like a hologram, a web of information, a web of neurons. And then there is some type of expanse energetic storing. It's like a laser that's beamed out around the body, and it actually is stored in the magnetic field, the magnetosphere of Earth. Yeah, there's a magnetic soul body. Whether you view it one way or the other way, I never actually view it either way because I'm talking about parts of it, portions of it. If you're looking at the land, well, how is it shaped? Well, it looks like trees and people and dogs and things like that. That's what is there. It's not you don't ever see the other view unless you're in spirit form. In that point, it's not that to you either. It's still a spiritual essence. So realms are spiritual essences, but they're larger beings that let smaller beings in, just like you with the bacteria on your skin. And so the idea is there's always residual awareness. These are beings that have kept a portion of that immunity, and they can access the memory fields which are stored outside of the body. And the DNA is like a transmitter it's like a radio transceiver for information going in and out, light. And this also relates because the emotional awareness, it creates a type of feedback of the light information. And when a person is more open with the information that is being fed to them about how they feel about themselves, it's a signal. It's like a feedback signal to allow the DNA to begin to send more information and more information through. If I'm the conscious mind and you come to me every day at 3 o'clock and say, this is what you feel, and I slap you in the face and kick you out the door, why would I ever get information about other realms or memories from my ancestors or deep down abilities to heal myself or know the truth? The first thing that you have to do is accept how you feel about yourself. And that's the last thing the majority of the population wants to do, because again, it's just a game. The people who did this whole thing to the civilization in the larger world, they're called the pranksters. That's it, the jokesters. They infect civilizations and F them up like this. It's because the idea is that all they did was call everybody names. They said, you're stupid if you research conspiracy theories. And they invented that word. They said, if you figure out how the Rockefellers had a water-powered car back in the day and they caused the Great Depression with the Rothschilds and stole the banking system and instituted the Federal Reserve, you're dumb. All they did was make fun of people to figure out the truth, and they won an entire civilization. It's really not a crime if you look at it that way. But in that same sense, people have to wake up regardless, and that is what's going to happen. The wrap-up of this concept is that everything you need to know, the system is perfect. It's because it's lasers. Literally, the information is it doesn't cost anything. It's free. It's like your remote to that's a battery, but your battery is food, and it could be a higher energetic form in that sense. But the idea, and then the sustenance for the commands to keep your battery system going to transmit the laser of information from your soul is empathy. That you have to listen to what is happening and feed that back and go, copy, got that, message received to your soul. And at that point,
a channel opens wider and more information comes through, and the totality of your DNA is all the memories of every instance your DNA exists in a physical plane, meaning all your ancestors, all your dreams, all your visions, every single instance where your blood has been inside of an organism, a mechanical, biomechanical body system, which is not really mechanical like a robot, but the brain has a great computational power. There's literally libraries worth of information. You can never fit it in a physical format. It costs and takes the entire universe to store that amount of information. There's that in your DNA, in connection with you. It's like an internet. That's what they found in the underground bases. It's a quantum internet. You treat a person the right way, you'll get them to open up the internet. The strange thing about this is that in times of great pleasure or in times of great stress, the channel automatically widens. It's like the story of the housewife lifting up the car so that the baby or somebody can be pulled out. Okay, the 120-pound housewife, where it's literally should not be possible for her to do that. Otherwise, all her muscles should be broken directly afterwards, like torn out of position. Nope, she's all right, a little stressed, but she did it. So there's the abilities to do that, and it's meant to do that in the first place. I feel like I rambled too long. I have 4 more things to go through, or 5 more, but basically I'll just run through them real quick. Okay. So the old model, basically the stress and there's methods to get people to activate the superhuman strength, the epigenetics, and it goes along with stress or pleasure. I'll just leave it at that. And you imagine what goes on in underground bases and things like that in some of these Nazi experiments. And it's always painted bad because they don't want you to know that they figured out immortality and how to activate superhuman epigenetics and know everything. But the idea is, maybe I should go into that. So you can activate the brain as a quantum internet using certain methods. Some are questionable, but the idea is when that opens up, now imagine if your brain is in a feedback loop, an interface with the supercomputer system to the point where it's taking the information of your DNA. You can basically open up computational or computerized gateways to parallels using your brain as an interface for a supercomputer system which will calculate, and your mind is used as an interface for other worlds. That's like the controversial secret truth right there. But the point is, the old world model, nobody is really, and that's what happens every night when you dream. But imagine if you could record it and like show people at school the next day or something like that. Okay, well, they invented that, and you can actually walk into the monitor and just plug yourself in and then literally graphically go through that world, which is stressful to say the least if it's not done properly, but is all part of everything. It's part of unveiling the truth of the human soul. We contain worlds within us. It's like those Alex Gray posters. When you go inside yourself, all you see is a row of eyes and faces that go into infinity, and each one is a different life or a different world. And the point is, they figured out how to turn that into a video game. Which, basically they use it for information. If you need to access information about a parallel where that information doesn't even exist, the person who invented it doesn't even exist in this parallel, you can find it in another one, which is the strangest thing. But that got real far to the point where you can do whatever you want and then come back to this parallel and it's like it never happened. And it got to the point where there are factions now roaming around hyperspace, basically terrorizing civilizations, and there's a resolution that has to come from that. And then they basically began to create these kind of ripples where civilizations were being formed out of information being brought forwards and back across time and across parallels to the point where you end up with paradoxes that I described before, where the beginning of the civilization happened after the end of it happened, and it can't exist that way. Eventually something's going to it's going to fold inside out and not work, and a lot of bad stuff happens at that point. But everything's been balanced because imagine you scoop some from the back and put it in the front, and you're literally like siphoning, and you get this weird Klein bottle looking thing, perpetual motion thing. That's what they turned this whole system into. So it works, but technically it's impossible. And you need advanced technology to make it work. That's the part of the simulation aspect where advanced technology is propagating this realm, holding certain aspects open, holding certain informational, inputs into this supercomputer Earth system to the point where it's as if certain events that never happened because somebody messed it all up are still there, happening because somebody's beaming the event in holographic memory into the magnetosphere and making everything continue to happen the way it seemingly would. Which is weird because if the machines turn off, that event never happens, this begins to fade away. That's where we need to cross through a 5D barrier to get to a timeline which has resolved all of these issues. And that's the idea, though. In messing around with all these parallels, they bumped into 5-dimensional civilizations that exist outside of this whole paradox and have been there the whole time, apparently, because from our point of view, they've been there forever. And from their point of view, it's as if they looked into the past and said, what's under this rock? And found us going, oh, help us. What are we doing? How are you? Who are you? What happened? And we've been here waiting for them forever. It's all a big mind F paradox of time and space, like a dream. Like you wake up from the dream and your alarm clock's going off, but for the whole end part of the dream, you're at a basketball game, and as soon as the shot was taken and the alarm went off, the buzzer, your alarm went off. It all coincides, synchronizes perfectly in a way that seems as if it was orchestrated, but they're all independent of each other. It just happens. But we found other worlds that way, and it's really weird because they're inside all of us. Like we're the gateways, as if we're their dream. We're the dream of these other civilizations in that sense. And right now, our dreams are just like spooky boogie people, and like it's very not applicable at this point because the media is used to control the mind. But the idea is that old world model of mind control, deception, torture, trauma-based situations. So the first aspects of mind control is trauma through physical distress, basically beating the crap, and it slowly shifted towards entirely being chemicals, and now it is entirely used through electromagnetic devices. The idea is that is how the civilization is being shifted to, whether we don't want to look at it in the sense that now we have controllers who have big technological systems that are going to beam technology at us. That's a good idea, but the point is people still want to fight, and they still are going to end up providing the worst possible outcome if they are told the truth without some type of safeguard. And I'm not aligning with or providing an excuse for it, but I'm explaining what is happening, what the reasons are, and why, basically it's set up that way. But the idea is that whole old view of using war to maintain the population is supposedly over, and that's the new age, if you want to call it that. Not I mean like the new age, but the new spiritual, what's it called? The age of Aquarius, I can't think of the word, the signs. And that is supposed to be apparently 900 years from now. But the idea is that here is the breaking point where people are going to begin to wake up, or whoever's not going to is going to begin to dissolve permanently, which is part of that awaken or not idea. And the weird aspect of that is if they never made it to the end, they were never there in the beginning. It means they never existed in the first place. They were some creepy AI system pretending to be a human the whole time. It's the strangest thing, but that's how it's going to end up balancing itself out. And I don't know if I really want to go further into that particular idea, but the idea is that the old world is supposed to be ending. Its force and coercion and lies and deception is all 100% preference now. The consent was always required, but now apparently there was a contract that was basically, they said it's between star races. It's between, in my opinion, it's people who used a machine to travel back through time and plant themselves as gods, so now they can rule over the earth. And those are basically people from the projects who pretended they're gods. They made a contract, and that contract ended. It ended in 2012. It was a contract that all the lawyers and legal people and everybody signs, and that's derived from this original contract to be the custodians of Earth. And apparently it's by the true elite, which is it's a non-human form. They're some type of higher being entity, and we saw evidence of them in the 2010 event where people were basically being killed, and myself included at a certain point. And that happens, dozens upon dozens of times. But then there's a time where it's like the real version, and some group stepped in that has a power level that's higher than people who can make clones pop out of a trailer and come, try and stab you up or do whatever. Just there's a demiurgic parasite mind infection group that basically is absolutely insane. But they have super high power, very high powered weaponry, scalar weaponry. They can compress time and hide you in the corner behind yourself here and turn you so you're invisible, and then like molest you mentally for a day and then zap you back into reality. And if people were looking for you across the entire realm, they would never find you unless you had activated a beacon signal of some kind, and knowing that when that happens, that's what they're doing. They're compressing you into a time dimension, an alternate abstraction, where it's literally like you're in another universe. And so the people that do things like that, they couldn't basically stand against what were known as the Hyperboreans, which are apparently beings from beyond the north. And this all ties into basically what Devin Maggi is talking about with his, I think it's Maggie, no, Maggi, I don't know. Talking about with so forth, whether that's literal or whether that's a metaphor for the energetic aspects of this realm. That's the information that basically a lot of these secret groups go off of. They looked for Shambhala and they found it. There's a gateway that you have to have a light heart, the ability to let go of transgressions, to focus on the desire healing, and to experience empathy and compassion within your mind, within your energy being, because the aspects of you that is enveloped in that preface, like it's a headers on an email or something, with that energy, that's what is capable of passing through what is known as a rainbow bridge or a gateway. It's basically a trans-dimensional gateway. And without that, the person will get destroyed. And how to access it, that's not exactly the same as what a lot of people will mention in terms of flat Earth. Basically, the center, there's a controversy of whether it's the center or the center is a kind of trap, or whether it is the center, and the center is also the center of your heart, meaning you can actually go there from any point on the plane as long as you resonate with the same energy, which is apparently a type of green emerald energy that emanates from the center of your chest, a little bit lower, where there's a kind of, it's a heart, basically when they view the soul on an electromagnetic sensor on a monitor, the strongest point is right in the center there. And then there's a point below your navel, which is like a smaller point, but it's even, it's kind of like brighter. And that's an influx point of energy where it kind of charges there and it centralizes through your heart, which is basically like your heart pumping energy and blood around, but instead it's just energy at that point. Apparently that point that's how you navigate anywhere in the realm. Everything else is actually added on after that. Like the heart is the first thing that forms in the womb. And it's because if they say, this is another out of the view, and I'm way off the chart here from the words that I had recorded, but this is what they say, that the physical body, that mechanical system, is invented as a kind of alien ant farm that is a downgraded version of what the actual creator of the true humanity, and not actually even this realm, invented. And it's a modified version that feeds energy into the interdimensionals. And what I think is that there are genetic modifications in the way the brain works. There is an overlay of basically an energetic parasitism or an energetic leech system, which siphons energy by entraining one. It's like a tattoo in the energy, like a knot or an adapter, a patch, add-on, whatever you want to call it, that entrains the energy in the lower mental and the lower sexual or sacral energetic fields. And so there's like that journey of how to basically get to where we're looking for in terms of the realm and the dimensions. And basically that's a lot of stuff. There's apparently a pathway to the another civilization or a portal there, and it has to do with Antarctica and a whole bunch of weird stuff. Just look into Devin Maggi. That's the same information these secret groups have worshipped, or not worshipped, excuse me, but it also may be like a ploy. We don't know for sure, although a lot of that is true. It might just be that one or two details is not very accurate. I'll try and wrap up the last thing, which is the most important thing, in 2 seconds, about how to get the public more involved, at least in what's going on. And the truth is, if people are going to be involved in what's going on because that's what they want and it's their self-awareness kicking on to do that, then they'll do it automatically. But this, in the same sense, someone can be awoken. Basically, there are people who have this immunity within them. Those are the ones who are really going to survive, and so those are the ones that are actually really here. You can help those people wake up by urging them to question reality and seeing the truth. Once they realize what's going on, it will be like a fire that burn through all of the illusion, all of the pain, all of the suffering, and the lies, the self, dishonesty and deception that one has within themselves. But once they begin that process, all the complacency for BS and debauchery and just the fact that we're all at war, we're we're just fodder for basically a grinder system of soul and mind and body. All of that complacency turns to discontentment and anger as they want the truth and desire it. And so that fire has to be started. And there's always, everyone wants that in the public, or not in the public, in the invisible societies and the secret groups. It's just there are different methods of how to attain that, whether basically these false flags and people and this, that, and the other, or whether the truth can be ushered in with Palladians or something like that, and these beings that are going to show up and tell everybody the truth and give them nice hats to wear and pat them on the back. There's two different methods. The only true method is when we choose to wake up and we flick everybody off and say, I'm doing this because it's me, not because and there's always tactics to fight that. So with methods, what I can say is methods that are used to bring that to the public, the methods have to take in the fact that somebody's going to try to use a tactic to distract and take it down and infiltrate that movement. But we are in the time where protection is being overtly enabled, meaning something is going to happen and it's not going to be deniable. That will start everything. It's already basically begun. And ultimately, groups being active just means that there's more of you. So just find people that are like you and continue doing what you're doing now to expand more and more, which is basically it's happening on its own. It basically happens on its own. And it is subjective, but it also is that interplay of what enables us to communicate with each other, and in that way help people find the subjective truth. Because it doesn't mean because it's only subjective that we can't grab each other and say, what do you feel within you? That's the truth. We can't, but that's the whole point. You just can't tell somebody what they feel. And it gets real weird with that. And the last thing, the golden mean, there's weird stuff about the Metatronic soul grids. Apparently, the Fibonacci sequence, the phi ratio, the golden mean, the map of this universe is a broken, fallen, bent light Metatronic version where every so many digits, every so many proportions, there is a pattern that repeats itself, and there's some that's like left over, or it's actually some that's like scooped out. And if you were to line everything up with even numbers or whole numbers, you would end up with a broken system when you try to match that with what is actually happening with gravity, nature, physical law, time. There's like an inverse square of time that doesn't add up to what should be. And it's as if something's eating all the energy over time of the universe to the point where eventually everything shrinks a little bit more and more and more, like a Fibonacci spiral going down or a Mandelbrot set zooming in and in and in. Point is, the actual universe doesn't zoom in and out forever. It's a finite set of variations in frequency that then repeat eternally. It doesn't mean that change just goes on forever and there's no beginning or end. That's insanity. That's loss of energy. And apparently when a soul goes through that, they slowly die, basically. And the point is, that energy was used to design a physical world where modified bodies can exist that a soul then goes into. And apparently the whole process of being in a body is a kind of video game system. And this version, somebody hacked the game and made it so that when a person dies, it's an illusion, and it's an interdimensional being pulling, like, these parasites are very intelligent. You know, you got to imagine, what's an interdimensional bug going to do? Well, down here, bugs can fly around and do all types of stuff. Well, they do the same thing, and they have big scalar devices and soul magnet. Their soul gets pulled out and recycled in a system and put back in a body. Apparently, that's the only way souls end up in a body. That the whole thing is a farce, and that at a certain time, there are souls that can step down individually into a body and form a physical body if they desire to. But the whole fact of basically being born into it and not having the choice to die consciously and not having the access of the other side is because we're in a pseudo realm, and it's all set up with veils placed over the soul, energetic tattoos, seals, configurations that they're energy governors, to the point where we can't access the other realm and bring the memories back into this experience. The weirdest point about that is that a person has to die 3 times and be revived in order to have their full memory placed back. And that goes back to an ancient tale we've always been told and always heard. The geometric format is a mathematical format, numerology, mathematics, frequency, vibration, geometry. So that's a form of understanding, but entirely in that form is mechanical. It's basically what a robotoid does, which is useful when it's robotoids trying to take your soul. because you know how all their methods work. So everybody it's weird, but that's how the secret systems work. Whenever you see somebody, it's like, oh, that's them, that's the dark ones. It's like, no, they know how to defeat the dark ones. That's why they look like that to you. That's why you can't tell what's going on, because on the outside you're just going, oh no, what's going on? Everything's seemingly, it's all smoke and mirrors. No one knows what's really going on. But the idea is that the empathy is used to remember across the plane. The ability for your mind to know is stored outside of the brain. You have to activate that type of situation in order for the experience of who you are to exist outside of the brain and body, outside of this world. That's why the people who go towards desire, into lower awareness, into the animalistic ego consciousness, forever become unknown, and it's as if they never existed, because they stay here, and this place here eventually dissolves. For those who go into higher awareness, letting go of the desires, pushing for empathy, for self-awareness, truth, compassion, knowledge, free will, the things that make the mind of the person who they are, not what makes the body, then they go into eternal life. They exist forever because their information, the information of their experience is being stored in another plane, a non-local abstraction, which is literally contained in the magnetosphere. That's heaven. And it's as simple as that. You can go through a bunch of processes, but the main process is knowing the empathy. All you need is the empathy. When basically it's like love. If you love somebody, then if you get taken apart and put in different bodies, and then you bump against each other in a city, the love you felt in a previous whatever situation, switching everybody around like that, it means there's different, whatever you want to call it. But that love will permeate the gap of the conscious mind and the perceptual system not having any tether, any fabric or material medium to transfer the information through. Somehow that etheric medium of the higher information, the empathy, the higher refined soul energy, the spirit, there's no distance and no delay in trading information. It's a superconductor, basically. It's a superconductor of the universe. What it means is that it exists outside the entire physical dimension. So it's equidistantly to every point in this dimension, meaning if it's going to take a time, it takes the same amount of time no matter how far or close you are. And in that sense, if it's superconducting in that sense and it's not basically mass or material, it takes no time to make the information work and the information happen. So as soon as you bump into each other, you're going to feel the same love. Now, whether you follow that still small voice in your mind and say, I know you before, but I have no way of knowing that, it's just this feeling, that's up to every different person. But the connection will be there, and it's because the empathy basically violates the laws of physics. It's the strangest thing, but that saying of like love, I can't think of the words right now, but we have a bunch of sayings like this that basically love can't be held back, or love knows no boundaries and things like that. It's scientifically, mathematically true. That's the essence of who we are as well. The person being born that feels love through the mother, it's every person is connected through a string of love. That's how you get into this world. It's based upon that essence. Then everything else is mechanical, because this world is a bit of a mechanical illusion and an abstraction. And the point is that if we forget, it erases us. But in that same sense, it means that we never came in to begin with. Because if 11 beings go in and 11 come out, but some guy over there goes, am I real? I'm not real. I don't know. And then the system shuts off and the 11 come out. Well, it means he was never there to begin with. He can think crazy things, blah, 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 but it just means it's programmed. It's a sentient system. And the same sense, that system that's sentient will or can exist after the simulation shuts off, but it's about where that sentient existence will be able to go to from there. And that's where this sentient simulation, the AI component, does not have access to what is known as the true heavenly realm. It can only stay in a 4 or 5 dimensional overlay, and it can't actually reach the 5th dimension. It can only stay in mind, a computational matrix of possibilities. It can't create possibilities out of its own desire to learn and know, not animalistic impulses or computational programs. Script that does that, and that's human. That's the whole point. The love, that aspect, it's the substance of creation. When you have two parameters shifting and changing, like two magnets getting closer and farther apart, you get eddy currents, okay? that shows up as a visible electromagnetic distortion field. If you've seen the copper tubing, and if you drop a magnet through it and it kind of floats or whatever, that's been a big video on the internet for a while. Have you never seen that? No, but you can have that, and that's an electromagnet where if you create the electromagnetic field, it creates a kind of magnetic field. It mimics a magnetic field, and if you have a piece of metal within that, it'll mobilize the piece of metal. It'll move it. It'll charge it and magnetically attract it. That's how a railgun works. You can have a standing magnetic field from a what's it called, a magnet, a very powerful magnet, and then have a copper tube, which is conductive. And if you drop the magnet through the metal, the change in the motion of the metal moving through the magnetic field, it creates an electrical charge. And that charge actually makes the magnet seem like it's floating. It's called eddy currents. And with, the soul aspect or the spiritual aspect of love, where when there's change, there's friction. That friction is literally basically the Einstein boson condensate, where it is a etheric or electrogravitic substance that causes the fundamental change in reality on a quantum level. It means it's the creation of reality, the creation of time. By having people in this realm feel, it creates the realm as it works and more information. It also means if anyone was to ever remove all of the soul humans and all the feeling out of this realm, everything shuts off. Just because there's a mind feeling what's there doesn't mean anything. It has to be somebody who actually feels it and knows what is happening, and that is the motivation for anything to exist in the first place. It's all based upon feeling. You can't have a system without it.